Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kicks and Picks podcast. Coach Steve here. We have Nick back with us. Scotty is here as well. He is no longer has the burning room. Anfield is back, doing well after last weekend. Scott, I got to start with you because your boys, they screwed me, and you got to be feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, it was a pleasant surprise. I think we've learned one thing about Liverpool this season, and that's they play better with 10 men on the pitch than 11. I think they are up 3-0 when they're 10 men on the pitch, and I think it's something like 2-2 or 2-1 when they're have all 11 guys on the field. So might be a strategy for Klopp moving forward. Let's just keep more space open, take a guy off. Don't have to wait for a red card and lose him for the next match, but it was certainly a nice twist. I'm happy to see my boy Darwin Nunez succeeding. I've been bummed that he hasn't been starting this season. I get that they've been trying to experiment more with Gakpo and Jota as like a false nine, but I mean, when you're spending 100 million euros on a striker, you got to play him. I don't care. You have to play him. He didn't set the world on fire last year, but he wasn't, bad by any means. And he's starting to show that he's putting the, finishing touch together now, scoring goals. And, he's got 2 goals in the season and I think something like 33 minutes played. Give him a start.
I was going to argue that sometimes they have 9 men on the field because Gakpo has been
he's been
terrible.
Bad. We said that in our preview, and we asked Andrew the question, what do you think about Gakpo? Because I've been lukewarm on him at best, and I don't think it's his fault. I just don't think Gakpo is a false 9 midfielder. I think he's a winger. I think he plays best when he's out in the left wing. But we have Luis Diaz out there, who's probably been Liverpool's player of the season so far. So what are you going to do?
He just seems like the odd man out in terms of talent. Forget about position. I mean, positionally, it's tough when you have so many good players to fill only so many roles, but he's the odd man out because he's the worst player, I think, out of all the options. Just my opinion.
And
I
think he would be great as an impact sub, though. Like, bring him in, right? Like when Luis Diaz is running around the pitch for 70 minutes, take him off, bring on Gakpo. Gakpo can, have a little bit more possession-based game. It's not going to be as, pacey and direct, but I think he's a good option off the bench. Yeah. So I hope Nunez gets to start, this weekend against Villa. We'll see. I feel like Klopp is going to kind of hold on to this false 9 thing until at least the international break, but the guys earned it at this point.
Yeah. I guess I have to take fault for my Tottenham loss because as soon as I turned the match on, I was feeling pretty good. I turned it on, midway through the second half or so. And as soon as I turned it on is when Nunez scored the first time and then scored the second time. Rough loss for me, rough loss for the pod as we finished 4-6 on the weekend. Down exactly 2 units somehow with the numbers that we hit. So not ideal for us, but the pod lock did keep locking again. Yes, Barcelona came through. Scary times there, but they ended up coming through with the 4-3 victory. Another one that really made us sweat because they were up 2-0 in the first half and blew that lead. But we have to bounce back this week, right? I mean, I guess before we move on to this week, let's just talk about some things we noticed last weekend. I'll start with Serie A. I just have to say, Serie A looking a lot like last season in terms of teams dropping results, right? Teams that shouldn't be losing matches or dropping 2 points in a draw. You go through Atalanta, started the weekend losing at home to Frosinone 2-1. Shocker, right? I think Nick and I both agreed that Frosinone is probably the worst team in the league on paper. Should be relegated, and they lost that match. Roma lost 2-1 at Hellas. A bit of a surprise there. Fiorentina blew a 2-0 lead at home to Lecce and drew. And Lazio losing 1-0 at home to Genoa. Matteo Retegui, the Italianized Argentine, right? First
could have had 3 goals.
First match against your boys, and he scored. Really just Inter. Oh, I almost forgot. Juventus 1-1 against Bologna, right? They had to come back and get the result there. So of the top 8 teams on paper, 5 dropped points. Napoli, Inter, and Milan remained perfect. Nick, what stood out to you in Serie A last weekend?
So we didn't do an official Serie A preview on the podcast this year, but I did go on with our good friend Martino. Went for about an hour together in depth, and anybody could check that out on his Twitter, on our Twitter, if you haven't. I think one of the things that we had said, and I know the 3 of us have talked about it offline, we haven't said it on the air, but one of the things that we've said seems to be very, very true through 2 weeks, and that's Napoli, Inter, Milan are the class of the league. Everybody else is fighting for 4th place or worse. And based on the results Coach Steve just read off, that is 100% true. These are, the other teams are dropping points against relegation teams, against bottom 10 teams. you can't have that because the Napolis and Inters of the world certainly aren't going to make those mistakes. Milan is off to a flying start. I think they're not the biggest surprise, but they're definitely, I didn't think that their offense would gel this good this quickly.
That's the word, the gel, right? I didn't think they gel so fast.
So that's been definitely a bright spot. They're fun to watch. I think we'll certainly get into our picks. If you're watching on YouTube, you see who I'm a believer in this week. I think Inter, yeah, I will reiterate, I think it's tough to go against the defending champs, and Napoli are a great side, but my thoughts there, and Scotty, I know is a believer in this as well. They're going to be greatly impacted by the Cup of Nations this year. Osimhen, we don't know how much time he's going to miss. He's going to miss at least a month planned, probably more than that because people come back injured. So I think that's a knock on Napoli. They need to stack as many goals and as many points as they can early on, which they seem to be doing. But Inter, to me, has the deepest team in the league. I mean, they cruised to a 2-0 victory this past week. They were up 2 goals relatively early, and I don't think they were neutral from there on out. They never got worried. So I think that's going to be a theme for that team all season. They're going to try to do well in all 3 cups, and they have to imagine they could win the league. They have to have that belief, I think, after last year.
Yeah, I think all 3 of those teams definitely have to have the belief. Napoli, Inter, and Milan at least after the first 2 weeks, right? On paper, they all seem to be the strongest trio, and I think on the pitch they've proved it so far. And like you said, they have the rosters to do it. Scotty, we'll jump to the Premier League for you. Premier League, some surprise results too. West Ham beating Brighton 3-1, definitely unexpected at Brighton. That not one we expected to see. We talked about the Liverpool Newcastle result. Newcastle up a goal at home. Definitely a surprise there. I mean, City, they had their hands full with Sheffield for quite a while. Yeah. Arsenal dropped points to Fulham. Villa's been hot. United had a tough time with Nottingham Forest. Chelsea really kind of cruised against Luton Town, which we expected. Tottenham continues to impress so far the first couple weeks of the season. What stood out to you last weekend? Oh, and we guess we have to throw in that Everton hasn't scored a goal in 3 weeks. Your bitter rivals there.
Yeah, I think the theme so far in the Premier League this season is that there's no clear team that is the class of the league right now. City, as you mentioned, they're sitting there at 9 points through 3 matches. Can't really ask much more from them, but they certainly haven't looked great. And with the injury to De Bruyne, I certainly think they're more vulnerable this season than they probably have been in years past. Haaland is going to be a little bit isolated. We saw him getting frustrated in the first half against Sheffield United, not getting the service he's used to. Grealish and Foden are going to have to step up in that regard, and maybe even to an extent Alvarez. So we'll see how they kind of, round out their roster going into the first half of this season now. Arsenal, who we all kind of have pegged as being potential repeat title contenders, have looked shaky, dropped points to Fulham this weekend. I think the offense isn't quite clicking as well as it was last season. They certainly don't seem to have the same mentality where they just come out. Remember, I think I made a ton of money last season taking Arsenal first half money line because they would come out and they'd score, 2 or 3 goals within the first 30 minutes in regular cadence. And that hasn't been happening this season. And then Newcastle, who I think was kind of a question mark, right? They're going to have to deal with Europe all season long. They haven't looked great to start the season. Granted, I think they probably had the hardest schedule to start the season, getting both Liverpool and City in their first 3 matches, but nothing to really write home about aside from maybe Alexander Isak's play. So there's not been a real runaway front runner in the Premier League, which is good for the competition and the appeal of the league. But I think there is some clear cellar dwellers to start the season. Everton, certainly one of them. Lots of concern on the other side of the Mersey. Have yet to score a goal, as Coach mentioned. Really potentially dire stuff. I mean, if you're a patron and you've been reading our power rankings, I've been writing about how Everton's scheduled to start the season before this international break at the end of September is about as soft as it's going to get. And then after that international break, when you get into October through the holiday period, they play 12 of their matches. 8 of them are against teams that are projected to finish in the top half of the table. So it does not get any easier for them. And if they're not taking advantage of the softness of the schedule now, it could be a very long season for them because it'll certainly be another season where they're constantly being talked about as potential relegation candidates. And then aside from them, I think, Luton Town, we they're a good story. We talk about their stadium and kind of have, some jokes at that the stadium's expense, but Kenilworth Road still not quite up to Premier League standards. They had to, miss their first home game against Burnley, which really would have been an opportunity for them to get points. But as such, they've had to open the season with 2 away games, and they haven't looked good. They've lost both games by 3+ goals. I think they're prime candidates to go back down. I think the management is kind of expecting that because you see them not investing a whole lot in newcomers, kind of like Forest did last year. They went out and spent 150 million pounds on transfers just to try to stay up. So I think Luton Town are probably taking the long-term approach here, maybe not going to invest as much in new players, and hope that they can come back up with a little bit more sturdy financial standing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely a lot to talk about there. Go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say Arsenal. It's funny. You said they've struggled. We know Jesus has been hurt. If only they had a forward that could play that, top number 9 role that was just sitting there.
I don't think Nkite has been bad. I know you're talking about USA National. You're talking about Balogun.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to move him. I
think
think
they are. But, I mean, don't you think that's the one thing that's looked a little bit off for them so far this year?
I don't know. I think the midfield hasn't quite hit its stride. I think Saka's been okay. He's been pretty good, but he hasn't been, last season, I think he was great. And Martinelli was the guy that everyone's kind of flagged as being a guy to make the jump. And, he's been good, not great as well. So I don't necessarily think that Balogun would be the difference between them sitting at 9 points and 7, but I think it's just they haven't quite clicked yet this season for whatever reason. Maybe it's a little bit of a slow start. But once they get up and running, I expect them to kind of hit that mid-season stride, and hopefully for Gunners fans that they could kind of recreate some of that magic they had last season where they were banging in goals left and right, especially early in the first half. That usually takes, it forces the opponent to play out more, and that opens up to more goal scoring opportunities.
Yeah, Balogun was, as far as I know, in Monaco today for his medicals. So he is no longer in the picture there. Interesting that he never really got a chance, like Nick said, considering the injury to Gabby Jesus. Maybe he could have helped out. And Nketiah did score last week, though. So, and like you said, Scott, no clear front runner in terms of like domination so far, but City 3 wins in 3 has to be a concern for the other teams that have dropped points so far. It has to be.
Their big win though really is Newcastle, right? They got Burnley and Luton Town to start the season. So in both of those games, I think we're at home. Or not Luton Town side. They got Burnley and Sheffield United, the other promoted club. So I don't know. They haven't really played anybody tough besides Newcastle, and they squeaked that one out. Yeah. So we'll see. TBD on City. I think they're more vulnerable this season than they have been in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and there could be some of that winter hangover too, right? You finally won the Champions League. You are a little, maybe slightly less driven because you've kind of won everything now. It's natural. It's human nature a little bit. So we'll see if that has an effect too as the season wears on. And
if Rodri goes down, I think they're in big trouble. Yeah, because their midfield is already kind of short, and Rodri has certainly been holding things together. And Kovacic will be fine, but he's not. We saw him at Chelsea. He's not a guy that's going to anchor a midfield.
Right.
So they got to hope that Rodri has a very healthy season and is, aptly rotated by Pep throughout the season.
And I ask this, like, scared to find out the answer, but like, how much better can Haaland be? I mean, I feel like I ask this week in and week out, right? Exceptional. I mean, I think it's within the realm of possibility. He repeats, comes close to what he did last year, maybe does a little bit better, but how much more is that improving this team? Because they've already gotten that from him, right? Like, what's he going to do? Score 40? I don't know.
Yeah. And the problem is, like, he is one of those strikers that is reliant on service coming into him. He doesn't create, for himself. We've seen games where he gets, 3 or 4 touches in the first half, but is completely isolated. And, without De Bruyne kind of being there to unlock things and open things up from distance, we kind of saw with Sheffield United, they kind of keyed in on him. They're being physical with him. They're getting him off his game. He was getting visibly frustrated, and, he is young. People forget that. Like, he is great, but he's also very young. There's certain levels of maturity that comes with that, which he doesn't quite have yet. And I'm sure he'll develop over the course of his career, but he'll be susceptible to having, off nights. And that's going to cost City because there's nobody else to pick him up right now.
Yeah, for sure. So looking ahead to this week in the Premier League, since we're in England right now, let's stick to it. Couple matches jump out at me. One of them being Brighton Newcastle. I think that's going to be a big match for those two sides. I think especially for Newcastle, having dropped 2 matches already to top 6 or top 4 rivals, depending on how high they can shoot this season. Arsenal, Man U jumps out at me. Also, your Liverpool, Aston Villa. What are you guys looking
Sunday
for?
Slate.
What are you guys looking for this weekend?
Yeah, I think the Sunday slate, it's our last in America here. We have our last Sunday before football, American football starts up. And I think this is as good of an appetizer as you're going to get. You're getting, Liverpool, Aston Villa. Aston Villa was one of the hottest teams just to end the season last season. They had a bad opening match against Brighton, or Villa, excuse me, against Newcastle. And then since then, they've been, scoring goals at will. I think they've scored 13 goals in their last 3 matches, including their Conference League qualifier midweek. So I think that will be a very entertaining game. I think there's going to be goals aplenty to start things off at the 9 a.m. Eastern time slot. And then you have Arsenal United, which is an old school rivalry. I think it's, 2 teams. United probably need this more than Arsenal right now. But if Arsenal want to be considered title contenders this year, this is the type of match at home that you would expect them to win. United's kind of got some concerns going on. We didn't touch about it too much last week. They did escape Forest that match barely with 3 points, but had they dropped, points in that one, they'd be sitting, in the bottom half of the table, probably in line with, the Fulhams and the Crystal Palaces of the world, on par with Chelsea. That's where they are. And they've been getting enough slack as well. So I think United, if they drop all 3 here, then there'll be some more discontent. That fan base loves to speak up about it. For Arsenal, like I said, I think they need to have this if they really want to be considered title contenders. If they're dropping points at home to this kind of slow started United side, it's what happened to Liverpool, right? Liverpool last season took this slow started United side and got walloped by them, and then United's season took off and Liverpool's kind of tanked. So it's going to be a big one. It'll certainly be entertaining either way.
Yeah, I don't have plays in any of these games yet, but Newcastle and Brighton is a toss up, right? Brighton's plus 155, Newcastle's plus 160. I think it's a must win for Newcastle. I really do. I mean, like you said, 2 losses out of 3.
Especially the way they lost last weekend,
just
too.
a brutal schedule,
more, right?
Yeah. So it's not an easy game. They're away from home, but they really need this one. I'm not looking at the draw no bet or the spread or anything like that, but I have to imagine that they're definitely a playable side in that bet. I'm guessing the draw no bet's probably around minus 110, minus 120, somewhere in that realm. So I would definitely look to that. At least that's how I feel today. And kind of, I feel the same way with Arsenal. I agree with Scott that Man United need the win a lot more, but Arsenal at home, they're minus 125. I think that's a really, really playable number on the money line. I mean, there's always a fear of the draw on this one, plus 295 if you're feeling that. But United are a pretty big betting underdog. So if you believe in United, you can get a great number on them. But I think Arsenal at minus 125 is probably the way to go.
Yeah, and I think those 2 sides have to be the 2 sides that came into the season with the biggest ambitions in terms of challenging City after last season, right? United came on in the second half when Ten Hag kind of started to put his stamp on the team. Arsenal was there with them for 85% of the season until they lost the second time to City. So definitely, if you want to hang with City, who's hosting Fulham this week and could very well be on 12 points after this, you got to keep pace to some extent, right? And City at some point will have to play some of the better teams. They have played Newcastle, we said, but they did play 2 newly promoted sides. But you're gonna have to keep pace as best you can, and draws in these matches only favor a team like City in the standings, really. If it does go that route.
No, I mean, now the more you're saying it, the more we're talking about it. Like, I feel like if Newcastle lose this game, if they drop 3 points, like, I don't know, man. It's like you're struggling to repeat top 4. I really believe that.
Tough sledding after that, yeah.
Unless you're just absolutely taking care of every team in the bottom half of the table, which they might. No. But they went on that magical run a couple of years ago when we started making money with them. They're certainly capable. And you mentioned Isak. I mean, he's been like a new signing, right? He's been awesome so far. Just the way they even play off of him, whether he's scoring goals or not. But I think they desperately need 3 points in this game. I think that's the most critical 3 points up for grabs this weekend.
Yeah, and then like our friend Baz said, when we had him on for the state of the club, their depth isn't really that great. And so when they get into the part of the season where now that they're in Champions League and they're competing for maybe a trophy with FA Cup or the EFL Cup, they're going to start to run into problems with their depth. They're not going to be as fresh. So dropping points early in the season, even though it's not been a super easy schedule, right? Probably the hardest schedule of anybody in the league. It still kind of sucks because, it's not going to get that much better when you are playing lower sides, but you're going to be playing on, 3 days rest.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So let's move on to Serie A. There are some other big head-to-heads there too that we need to talk about quickly before we move into our picks. three big ones in Serie A out of the, top 8 teams that are fighting probably for, the European spots when all said and done. We have Friday, Roma hosting Milan. We have Saturday, Napoli hosting Lazio, and Sunday, Inter hosting Fiorentina. Nick, what jumps out at you in those three?
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, all three of us have a play in the Roma Milan game, so I'll save my thoughts there. I think Napoli Lazio, it's two teams trending in completely opposite directions. Lazio has been worse than anybody could have imagined. But for me, as a fan of the team, it's really frustrating to see the mentality of this team. Forget about the talent, right? I think they're largely the same team as they were last year. You did lose Milinkovic-Savic, which is near impossible to overcome, but they did buy very smartly. Problem is, none of these new players have had time to train under Sadi. They haven't made any impact whatsoever, and they lost to 2 relegation teams. Absolutely unacceptable. And now they have Napoli and Juve coming up back to back. So my issue with it is that this team is never motivated. Sadi did not have them ready to play week 1 or week 2. I don't give a shit who's on the field. You got to be better than that. They haven't been. And quite honestly, for the 2.5 years that he's been in charge, this team doesn't have the will to come from behind and win a game or snatch points. If they're down by like the 70th minute, 3 points is out of the question. It hasn't happened. It won't happen. We saw that the first 2 weeks. Really, really rough. And Napoli look like the defending champions that they are. Osimhen's off to a 3-goal start through 2 games. Kvara is now back healthy. Rudy Garcia has new players in the lineup. They just got rid of Lozano, who's terrible. We've bashed him for 3 years on the podcast. Raspadori and Simeone look good. I mean, Napoli's a -175 favorite. They absolutely should be. I don't see any other way that this game goes. And I think Fiorentina, Inter should win that game. Fiorentina is another team that hasn't looked very good. They've scored goals, but their defense has been suspect. They've given up goals in both games. Even the one where they smashed Genoa, they gave up goals in that one. So they're going to struggle to score consistently. Same old Fiorentina.
Let me play a little
they've also
over
got
under.
Just one quick note on that one, Scott. Fiorentin's got their Conference League qualifier on Thursday too, so
there
they're
you
going to
go.
have to
Short turnaround. And they're down. They're down 1-0. Yeah. So Inter at home, you have to like them in this game.
Before we get into our picks, let me play a quick over under game with you guys. So home teams in those 3 matches are Roma, Napoli, Inter. Over under 1.5 home team wins out of those 3 wins.
Over.
Okay.
Easy over.
I will take the under.
Paper.
Just the way that things in Serie A have been going. I think there'll be some upsets. I mean, maybe Milan over Roma isn't exactly an upset, but Lazio did it last year, right? Lazio's beat Napoli. That was their
and that's
banner
the thing.
that they hung in the stadium this summer.
All the big teams. This is the same problem they've had for 3 years. They beat every team that's good. They can't beat the relegation teams.
And I think the thing for Lazio too, Nick, the problem with it's similar to Newcastle in the sense that they kind of overachieved because other teams struggled and they got into top 4, but their depth is going to be an issue when Champions League starts up. And if you start and you don't win either of these 2 matches the next 2 weeks against Napoli and Juve, you're on 0 points through 4, and then Champions League starts kicking off. Like, you're going to start to struggle more against these mid to lower table clubs and your depth is tested more.
You need to get 3 points out of these 2 matches, at least 3 points minimum. I mean, you have to win a game. I don't know.
All right, we'll check back in next weekend. I'll take the under. I say 2 of these away teams will get points.
And just one other match in Europe I want to point out, not in one of the 2 leagues we generally cover, but it is my boys Union Berlin hosting RB Leipzig. That is a big one in the Bundesliga.
Dude, Leipzig looked good.
Leipzig looked good, but so did Berlin. They scored, I think, 3 down a man the other day. And they didn't leave me with any regrets. I took it last week when you weren't here. I said to Scotty, my biggest regret from match week 1 in Bundesliga was not taking Berlin. They had a good number on them, and I didn't take it. And then I went back to them last week, and they cashed. That was one of our few nice results last weekend. So that's one to keep an eye on in the Bundesliga. And there's really big numbers on both those teams if you like either of them money line.
And one thing I do want to say, as we bet it more and cover it a little more, goals have not been coming as easily in Germany as they typically do early on in the season. It's just something to keep an eye on. Lines have been set at 3.5. I've been looking at them pretty religiously for overs, and they haven't really been coming due. So just an interesting reversal. Whereas like Spain is the opposite, right? Spain you would struggle to get 1 goal in a lot of these games, and every game seems to have 2, 3, 4 goals. I mean, we're not a month into the season, but just interesting.
All right, so I think we'll head over to our picks for this week. We also have a big guest coming up after our picks, so stick around for that. So, Scotty, why don't you kick off our locks of the week for match week 4 in the Premier League and match week 3 in Serie A?
Yeah, I'll start by saying Coach snaked Tottenham for me. I am 2-1 this season when taking Tottenham, and I am 0-6 when taking anybody else. So, Coach, you did me dirty. We'll see if we can get a winner somewhere else. My first one, I'm going to take Aston Villa double chance or plus half a goal, whichever gives you better juice at Liverpool. Plus half a goal I'm seeing is plus 125. So that's the one I'm going to be taking. Like I just said, Aston Villa are probably the hottest team right now in terms of goal scoring, 13 goals in their last 3 matches. And for Liverpool, they're already down to their 3rd and 4th choice center backs. Konate is hurt. Van Dijk picked up a red card against Newcastle, so he'll be suspended for this one. So at best, you're looking at a pairing of Matip and Gomez. Matip, we know, has been injured frequently throughout his career at Liverpool, so I'd expected to see him get rotated like he was at Newcastle. So that means you'll see Kwanzaa coming in, I think he's 17-year-old center half for Liverpool. So I think Aston Villa will probably be getting goals in this one. And like I said, unless I see Klopp actually put Nunez into the starting lineup, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think you'll still see Gakpo starting as that false 9. And I think it'll be a struggle for Liverpool. If Aston Villa come out and play, fearless, I think they'll get goals. And really the only way that I see Liverpool getting all 3 points from this one is in like a 3-2 type shootout where Liverpool managed to just outscore Villa. If you're afraid of Liverpool in this one, Aston Villa team total over 1.5 is plus 150. As I mentioned, they're scoring at will. Liverpool's defense is hurt. Their midfield is still kind of getting figured out with, the newcomers that they've brought in. So I think that could also be a decent shout.
Liverpool to concede first, a Scotty favorite.
Always. You do that too.
Coach, this is week 4 of the season, week 4 of picks. Has Scotty faded Liverpool all 4 weeks, or do I have that wrong?
Only two. I didn't fade him to start the season.
It's funny he's fading him after their big win last week.
Coach,
too.
Yeah.
Coach faded him last week. It wasn't me. I didn't take.
It was me. It was me.
That was
It
Coach.
Oh, I had
me
their
that's
team
Newcastle.
total week 1 and they fucking screwed me. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just putting us all together in one big blob.
All right. Yeah.
All right, so I'm starting the Premier League with West Ham. This is a Friday match, something you might want to lock in early because they're minus 125 at Luton Town right now. I was shocked to see them at minus 125. I was shocked. I really couldn't believe it when I saw it. That's why I jumped on it right away. After being held to a late draw by Bournemouth in the first weekend of the season, the Hammers have rolled to matching 3-1 victories against Chelsea and Brighton. Brighton was a big surprise for me. Luton should have a little bounce in their first home match in the Premier League, but it won't be enough against an informed West Ham side, in my opinion. I love this number, and I would take it every time.
Yeah, Coach beat me to this pick by, I want to say 45 seconds. First thing that stood out to me, thing we have to like about West Ham is all 3 of their guys are showing up so far, right? Antonio, Ward-Prowse, and Ollie. Oh, Bowen. I'm sorry.
Ollie is Villa. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I got West Ham 3rd in my power rankings this week. 2nd best team in London behind Tottenham. So that's all you need to know.
Yeah. I like that pick as well. So I'm going to stick with Serie A. Tried to rant a little bit, but I got to start with Napoli-Lazio game 1 over 2.5. It's at minus 120. And I think that's really what swayed me. This number has been minus 170 or worse the last 3 or 4 matchups between these teams. I know because we cover it every time it comes up. Lazio couldn't stop the 3 of us right now, right? Their midfielders have struggled to adapt. I kind of mentioned that. And I think Napoli's flying. So I would be really shocked if Napoli do not get at least 2 goals in this game. I think this is easy money, and it is a hashtag easy over.
Love a good easy over this time of year. All right. I will go to my second lock of the week. It's going to be a little bit of a change of pace here. We're going with Everton at Sheffield United. I'm taking the draw line at plus 220. They've actually been 29 Premier League matches so far this season, and yet only 5 draws. We had 2 last week, 0 in week 2, and 3 in week 1. I think it's a weird stat. I have not looked up what the average number of draws is through 3 weeks in the season, but it feels like this is a very low number. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that's the case. But given that, if there was a match where you would expect there to be a draw, it would be a match against 2 teams that are battling for every point that they can get and can't score goals. And that's exactly what you have with Everton and Sheffield United here. So I think this is maybe a game that's either 0-0, or if somebody does get on the score sheet, they probably try to protect that lead while the other team tries to go all out. We've seen all the extra minutes and stoppage time usually kind of pay off for the team that attacks in these kind of situations. So I'll go ahead and take the draw line here at plus 220. I think that's a really good number.
All right, I'm going to my next pick is the one that Scotty was has some gripes about, and it's Tottenham money line minus 115 at Burnley. A lot of people, including myself, wrote off Spurs this summer. However, after clawing back to a 2-2 draw against Brentford when they were down 2-1 to open the season, they've managed identical 2-0 wins over United and Bournemouth. Burnley's lost 2 home matches to City and Villa to open the season. I like Spurs to stay hot, and don't envy Burnley's opening schedule with the Luton Town one being postponed because of the scheduling issue. So I like Spurs to stay hot. Love the number at minus 115 on the money line, and I think they're playing some good ball right now.
Yeah, this is the case where the books are undervaluing a team and they haven't quite caught on yet, right? It happened with us in Newcastle, a year and a half ago, coming out of that January transfer window. I think it's happening now with Tottenham. They are playing a lot better than what books are expecting to, and at some point in the next 2 or 3 weeks they'll adjust. But until then, you're getting really good value on a good team.
And it's so interesting because they adjusted quickly with Chelsea, or maybe they're overvaluing Chelsea, but they haven't caught up with Tottenham. So let's ride it.
Yeah. That's what it is. You got to ride these teams while they undervalue them.
Absolutely.
I would if you didn't steal them from me.
I have to go back to a bet that is like the foundation of this podcast. You mentioned it, Coach. We had a rough week last week. We had 1 and 2 weeks across the board for the 3 of us. So the way that we get out of this slump is to go back to corner kicks. And to do that, we take the best team on the planet, at least in Italy, for corners. That is Inter. Team total corners over 5.5. It is plus money, plus 105. Corners are back. They had 8 corners in their first game, 7 in their second. I was really tempted to take over 9.5 for the game, but Fiorentina don't really get corners, or at least they haven't very well. They're going to be on that short rest, as you spoke about, Coach. So, do I bank on them to get 4? I don't think we can do that here. So I think Inter getting to 6 at plus money is the play. Corner kicks and picks back.
Nick's bringing the corners back.
Have to.
Also back will be Nick's Twitter videos of clearly deflected shots going out for corners, but getting called goal kicks. So
yeah,
look out for that on Twitter.
You have to admit though, I don't have the exact stats on this, but that has to be, we've averaged one of those a game, right? At least
Easily.
One missed corner call a game on a game that we bet corners.
I would say probably closer to 2.
Yes. So stay tuned.
All right. So now we will go to all of our third picks, which will all feature Milan and Roma. I'm going to start off with Milan first half money line at Roma. My thought process is this: Roma has looked bad this season. Like, they stink, and they're so bad that they're actually talking themselves into Lukaku being a great signing and a great deal for them, even though it's a loan and they're only paying $5 million.
I think like 1 million people showed up to the airport today or something.
Yeah. It's just, that's when you know a team is desperate. So I'm going to go ahead and take Milan first half money line. I mean, Roma's defense has also been just as bad, or a reason why they're so bad. They've conceded multiple goals to such offensive juggernauts as Salernitana and Hellas Verona. I think Milan have a little bit more offensive firepower that they can offer than both of those sides. So I expect Milan to come out, especially being away. Nothing really to lose here. Come out on the front foot, try and get a goal or 2. I could see this being a quick, easy match for Milan. And the first half money line here at plus 240 is massive. So I'll take that. Maybe Roma's play here is they try to hang in there, even if they're down 1-0 in first half, try and sneak a goal and in a draw. But the first half money line to me is a very juicy number.
All right. Like Scott said, we're all going in this match for this one. I'm going Roma versus Milan. Both teams to score at minus 115. Roma's defense has been far from Loctite, like Scotty mentioned, and both of their matches have seen them concede twice. Now, granted, the first one, it took some Kandreva magic, but they still conceded twice. But the attack has looked fairly dangerous, and their XG was better than what they actually put into the back of the net those 2 matches, which gives me some hope that they'll find the back of the net again here. They've been able to do that so far. Milan's attack's been clicking. I expect them to score at least 1, if not more. I really did think about going over 2.5 at plus 125, because that's not a number you usually get with these 2 teams playing each other, especially the way Roma played defense the last 2 years under Mourinho. But that could be worth a play too. But I could see this being a 1-1, like Scotty said. So I'm taking the both teams to score and playing it that way.
2 things I want to say. They got rid of Ibanez and got worse defensively, and Chris Smalling has looked awful.
Looks like Chris Smalling.
Yeah, no, I put out a tweet last week like he's in peak Man United form. Like he looks fucking terrible. That dude
The
has gotten
OG
burned for
Harry
just
Maguire.
about every goal. Yeah. So that is why I am also going with Milan in this one. I'm taking them full time. I'm taking them draw no bet -110. This is just way too good of a number to pass up. Kind of like the one Scotty got. I think, you know, Roma's at home, and that's the only reason that it's even like this. But you know, listen, have not looked fluid through 2 games. This is a number that I would take on a surging Milan squad 100 out of 100 times. Draw no bet -110.
You know,
All
out
right,
of
Nick.
principle, I'll probably have to fade that and go like Roma draw no bet because I like to lose money and I'm like too loyal to my club, and it'll probably make you win. So if you win
I
next
appreciate
week,
it.
thank me on the show.
Hey, I will. You got it.
All right, Nick,
All
give
right,
us our
pod
pod
lock.
lock of the week.
I don't want to give it, but I will. We're going to a team now. The Podlock is 3-0, game of the week. We have to go with the team that where the numbers tell us to go. It's Monaco. They burned us last week. Absolutely bad beat of the season. It's only been a few weeks, but it's a team that put 27 shots. I think 11 shots on target. They wound up with a 3-3 draw, had them on the money line against Nantes. Nantes had 3 shots and 3 goals. It was just absolutely brutal all the way around. Monaco's been rolling. They've scored 3+ goals in all 3 of their games. Lens has given up 7 goals in their 3 games so far. We are going with the team total so that they cannot hurt us at the end of 90. Over 1.5 goals, -125, Monaco, game of the week.
Yeah, and the numbers say right, and when
And they're at home.
I said you asked what the line was, and I said -125. We just couldn't believe it, right?
Yeah. So expect them to continue.
All right, so that'll wrap our picks. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. If you're listening on the pod, we have our interview coming up next with Wayne Gerard. We're talking all things Roma. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can catch that as a separate video as well on our YouTube page. So thanks again for watching and listening. And here's to a 10-0 weekend.